Yes, that's Betty. And there's Matthew.
First steps.
Yep. It's Betty holding on to his hand. Yeah, it makes me sad. I mean, the mother of my children is no longer. He doesn't even look like he's capable. I mean, there's no red flags. There seems to be love between everybody.
The case began as a fire call to a home in Castle Rock today. Police were called after firefighters found one person dead inside the home. Police say Matthew Buchanan is the sole suspect in the death of Elizabeth Bjorlo, his mother.
Yes. This one's hard to see. I can see clearly that this is Matthew, but this is not the Matthew that I knew. This is, I don't know. Yeah. It's hard to process this picture, you know, because I know where he is and I know what got him put there. He had threatened to kill me, you know, several times. And I always thought it was just words. It's just like, this can't be true. Like I said, this is not the Matthew that I knew. So this is my cabin. This is where I work. This is where I play. This is my man cave, so to speak, but I spend a lot of time in here. This is where I was when I got the call from my daughter and found out that her mother was killed and that Matthew did it. And I pretty much just collapsed in my chair and sat there for a minute trying to process the information. The police told us that we needed to get out of our house and find somewhere else to be, based on the threats that he gave, that he was coming here to kill, which all of a sudden it became credible threats, because now we had the harsh realization that he was capable of killing. It's a horror story. What are you going to do? You know, what threat am I going to face? Is my son going to be carrying a gun? Is he carrying a knife? There were a lot of variables I just couldn't answer. Didn't know what I would do if I saw him. I just didn't know. You know, all I know is that he's coming to kill. Yeah, this is a cute little moment, you know. I mean, when you look at his eyes in here, this is the little Matt that I started with, you know. He's smiling, he's engaging, he's looking at you in your eyes, and just joy. He was a joy at this point in life. This is a point in time where I still had hopes and dreams that he was going to do things in life and be something that he wanted to be. It's just like his whole life was ahead of him. Yeah. Give me a second. It's just such an innocent time. When I look at the pictures of him younger and everything, it takes me back to that place. Matthew means a gift from God. And not that he's not a gift from God. I still believe that he's a gift from God and everything, but does that mean gifts from God are murderers? It was Sunnyvale, California. A friend of mine in an apartment complex I was in invited me to go to his church, and I did. Betty and I just met and started talking. Shortly thereafter, the pastor says, God told me that these two need to be together. It was a natural progression in life to me. Who am I to go against what God wants? We use that, I think, as a confirmation that, you know, maybe there's something more in this. And together we realized that. Next thing you know, we got married.
Say hey. There's the little one.
Oh, he's been sitting on his chair. He's sitting at his table.
There's the big girl.
Well, I've always studied the Bible. It's a joy to take somebody and teach them, you know, right and wrong. And I would read to them Bible stories out of picture books, you know, so that they could see, you know, we could talk about the pictures as we read the story. And the idea was, you know, teach them our faith, showing love, you know, kindness, and trying to teach them how to be a good member of society. There's a point in time when everything was great. I don't know that I prayed to be a good dad. I guess just instinctually, I felt like maybe I was. You know, everything just seemed to be falling into place.
Here's Daddy and his two boys.
She was actually out having an affair for quite some time. And, you know, I was kind of stunned. We've got these young children together, and she's out having an affair. And she said, there's things that you don't know about me. And I'm like, yeah, you're right. She says, well, I smoke pot. But then she told me, she said, well, I'm tired of being a mom, I'm tired of being a wife, and I'm tired of playing the goody-goody two shoes role. And she said, I want out. Of course, I was overwhelmed because I had to take on that role of being father and mother. We tried to make life normal again, but, you know, how do you do that? It's like, just did the best that I could. Around that time, I noticed really that something was different with Matthew. He had a mean streak. I remember one time, all the kids were in the basement. That's where we hung out. They were just playing with each other. And I think one of the kids squirted shaving cream. And that started a shaving cream war. They started running around, chasing each other, trying to rub shaving cream on each other, you know, and it was fun to everybody. But when Matthew joined in, he rubbed shaving cream in my niece's eyes. And while he was doing that, he was laughing. And I pulled him aside, and he was still laughing and giggling the whole time I was trying to correct him. And I was trying to tell him, you know, that's not playing anymore. You could hurt her eyes by doing that. And I couldn't understand why he thought that was funny. It scared me a little bit to think that he knew that he was hurting her, but still somehow found it funny. told me. Basically, he put a dog leash on her and jerked her down and pulled her around and treated her like a dog. She said it was really hurting her and it was choking her and she couldn't get him to stop. To me, that was like more than playing hard. That was like demeaning, you know, like a message to her that he did not value her at all. I confronted him about it, but he denied, and he got angry at me for thinking that he could do such a thing. What I really hope for is for him to be honest about it and say, yes, I did that, and I won't ever do that again. Not hearing that, I was very concerned. I just didn't know if I was getting through to him. Well, that was my first big warning sign of violent behavior. But I never believed that that would escalate to murder.
A 59-year-old Elizabeth Bureau died this week in a house fire. One other person was hurt. Last summer, Bureau filed a restraining order against her son, but it was vacated by the court. Police believe Buchanan might have already left the state. If you have any idea where he is, call police in Castle Rock.
Pretty sure we were all getting ready to go to church. I mean, you can see the big smile he's got on his face and the brightness in his eyes and everything. I mean, I just see joy in him. He liked riding his bicycle. You know, that was his big thing. You know, father wants to go out and play with his kids and teach them things like that. And you take the training wheels off and you watch him, right? And it's like, you have this joy. It's like he's doing it, you know? It's like you're putting a piece of you in the world that's going to outlive you. And you just want to step away knowing I left goodness in the world. I mean, that's your hope. That was my hope for Matthew. The only time that I ever became physical with Matthew was I found in my garage some things that came from a golf course. So I thought Matt was vandalizing the golf course, and he stole some things from it and put it in there. And I talked to him about it, and he denied it. And he laughed. And I reminded him, Matthew, I am the authority in this household. And when I said I'm the authority in this household, he laughed at me again. I told him, I said, if you laugh again, I'm going to drag you across that table. He laughed at me again. I didn't know what else I could do. I couldn't just leave an empty threat. So I dragged him across the table. And I held him down to where our faces were probably a foot apart. I frankly got a little bit scared. It felt horrible. And it must have been scary for him because he didn't know what would be next. Kids don't come with a rule book, but I felt like I needed to make a point. I felt like he needed to understand and respect the authority that I have in my household. Oh, yeah. That's Little Shadow. He's a very small Yorkshire Terrier, even for the breed. I think he was a little on the small side. Matthew was mean to that little dog, to the point where we had to forbid him from being alone with the dog. He would take one of our big couch pillows and push it down on him, you know, and kind of keep him under the pillow, like tormenting him, really. He never did anything to kill him, obviously, but as soon as Matthew would come down the stairs, Shadow would go hide under chairs and pee along the way. He was traumatized by Matthew. I read so many stories about people who kill people start with animals, and they desensitize themselves along this path until they're capable of killing human beings, you know. I've heard of all of that. That crossed my mind when he was hurting Shadow. But it was a fleeting thought. I'm like, oh, well, that's absurd. He's just being mean to Shadow, and it's not gonna go any further. I always thought that I could get through to him. Maybe that's where I went wrong.
Breaking news, we have a picture of a person of interest after firefighters found a woman dead in a home in Castle Rock, 59-year-old Elizabeth Barlow. Police want to talk to Matthew Buchanan. He was last seen driving a white Dodge minivan. If you see him or the vehicle, call Castle Rock Police.
So we got out of the house and we stayed at my across the street neighbor's house. And I could look up the hill and I could see our house. And there were scary moments because somebody on our street has a van just like that. And we saw that van driving home. All of a sudden, fear grips us like, here's the moment. You know, is this Matthew? Is he hiding somewhere, planning something? Has he identified the traps the police have? You know, did he ditch the car and hit a different car? Every time a car would go down the road, our street, I'm like, well, how do I know that's not that? I felt like I had my neighbors in harm's way and my wife in harm's way, and all he wanted to do was kill me. I had a weapon with me, and the fear of actually having to use that was, it was terrible. If my wife was in danger, or my neighbors, then perhaps I could have done it. But I don't think I could have pulled the trigger to protect myself if he was threatening just me. I would have to use words and compassion and love and try to appeal to the Matthew that, you know, I knew. I mean, I think love will give you more strength than you ever really know. And I love him. It was so painful. All the effort into raising him and everything, and then it comes down to this. It's the most important thing in my life, my faith. I believe in God. I believe in a sovereign God. And I believe it when he says all things work out for the good, for those who love God. The events that occurred, it never made me question my faith. I don't know what God's plan is, but I just pray that he's got something for Matthew. My wife and I have the same prayer. Between us, we have 5 children. And our greatest prayer is salvation for each of them. And of course, that includes Matthew. We feel deeply that he needs salvation. Heavenly Father, we just come to you with our burdens. We ask for comfort for the family who love and lost Betty. And we ask you, Lord, for a work in Matthew's heart and his mind, and bring him back to a place where he can understand the things that he's done and really look to restore his relationship with you and ask for forgiveness. We just ask these things in the name of Jesus. Amen. he became angry and he was more unruly, challenging authority. I don't know what was going through his mind, but yeah, he was not respectful to us at that point in time. Matthew hated my rules. You know, I mean, they were completely reasonable rules, but Matthew seemed to not like rules at all. Our relationship started to change at that point. She said, well, the next time you bring your girlfriend here, make sure she takes her red panties home with her. And I'm like, what are you talking about? And then she basically accused me of having an affair based on finding red panties in the bed. And I'm like blindsided by it. I didn't know where it came from, you know, what the cause of it was. I had a suspicion that it was Matthew, and I'm like, maybe, I mean, did he plant them there? Well, I asked him about it, and he said it wasn't him, and he was angry at me for even thinking such a thing. But with his history of lying and everything, I told him, I said, she's using this as the basis of a divorce. You know, no empathy at all. I have no absolute proof of it, right? But all I can say is everything points to it. Everything points to it. He didn't like her. He wanted me to divorce her. I kept calling his phone, trying to get a hold of him, and no answer. And I panicked. I got on the internet and I found police scanners in the local area. I heard a report about a male that fit Matthew to the T behind a building, bleeding from his head. And I thought, oh my God, that's Matthew. Called the police, and it ended up not being Matthew. Started calling his friends, trying to track him. You know, all of these terrible scenarios are running through your head. You don't know if something happened to him. His mom had bought him a bus ticket. I wish that Matthew and I could talk about what he was feeling. Maybe I should have been, you know, that helicopter parent, you know, that snooping parent, and looked through his phone and whatever. I tried to respect his privacy and everything, but remarks were made in the past about how he could live there with no rules. I couldn't promise him an environment with no rules. I couldn't promise that. I wouldn't promise that. This is all about my perspective, right? You know, Betty had a loving family, so, you know, wouldn't want to hurt any of them. But I worried that he would be in his mother's environment. The drugs and the no accountability and everything. And again, this is just my perspective. It's things that I've seen, you know. But man, I really worried about that. I put this video together right after Matthew ran away, just to show Matt there was happy times. I just wanted him to know that he was loved, but it's kind of different to me now after he did what he did. Of course, I still want him to know that he was loved. But there was more hope behind this when I made it than there is now. Yeah. It's different watching it now. This crime happened in Colorado. No one here knows, only the people I've shared it with. And I'm just the average Joe on the street, just like everybody else is. It's not like a topic that I would bring up in any kind of a setting. I mean, as an example, if you're sitting around with a bunch of new people and having a meal or whatever, and they start talking about their boys or girls, whatever, what they do in life, then ask me, I probably would say what 4 of them do and just leave the Matthew incident out. I don't put it out there, but I do like to stay home. Every time I see a family with, you know, a mom and a dad and kids, I'm like, I bet they don't have problems like mine. They probably go home, share a meal together, read bedtime stories to their kids, kiss them goodnight, and then they just have this, you know, wonderful family experience and everything. And something that I used to have that kind of just ended. But it just makes me very aware of my pain.
Hi, Terry Buchanan. This is Elizabeth Giorlo. Up to now, you've not returned any phone calls, but you need to come get your son. He doesn't treat me like his mother, like I'm his mother. He has no respect for me. All I get from him are F you. He calls me names. I can no longer deal with this. He can no longer live in my house. So if you don't want him in the street, I advise that you get out here and come pick him up.
So there was definitely some anger or hostility behind that. There's never an appropriate time to say, I told you so, you know. But that was going through my mind. This is 2013. This is after the phone call his mother left me saying he's not welcome here anymore. And he came to stay with me, and I took him to a car show. Felt like we were bonding. It really felt like we were bonding. And he said, you know, I've done some things that should make me cry. And he said, I don't have the ability to cry. That caused me a lot of concern. That means, to me, maybe somewhere inside he knows that he should be showing empathy, but he's unable to do so. This is hard to read. It's pretty vile. He started this one with, talk to me, you worthless. I am so done with you. I'm going to be the one to whip you from existence. I promise you that I will be the one to end you. And he didn't communicate like this when he was at home. I don't know where it started or why it started. But when you read language like that and you can't make sense of it, you know, you can't fix anything. Every time I get emails like this one, I think I've lost my son. He's somebody else now. This one is repent, sinner. Jesus is a fraud and a tool. He's burning in the lake of fire. He writes, I'm going to in the Buchanan lineage with your head. If you will not accept defeat by my reason and honesty, then I will pick up my sword and I will make you acknowledge what is right. Of course, this cut me pretty deep, you know, thinking that my son is saying this to me. I don't understand it. And, you know, it did become a regular thing. That's why I had to block my accounts. I pray for him. But again, he's a grown man now, and I'm not engaging. The police would share that we got a ping from his credit card at a gas station. I think that was in Kansas, so we knew what time he was in Kansas. And of course, we had to slow down and do the math and like, well, where would that put him now? You know, you're listening to police scanners. And the things that were running through my head, it's like, if he does come to kill us, you know, my wife was over there with me too. I couldn't let that happen.
Police say Matthew Buchanan is the sole suspect in the death of Elizabeth Bjorlo. Buchanan was arrested in Florida this morning.
I think we're here today to talk about maybe two different Matthews. One who did this deed and the other one who Matthew was before. You know, he became capable of that. That's Matt number one. That's my Matt. The whole thing that created Matt 2 is the black box, you know. Like, I don't know what was in it. Who knows what's in the black box, you know? Influences, drugs, environment. But at the end of the day, this is not the Matthew that I knew, but the Matthew that was created. The truth is, I want to hear everything. The good, the bad, the ugly. I just want to have the raw truth.
Whenever you're ready.
I lost bodily control. I just lost control. I lost control.
You say you lost control. Did you have something in your hand when this happened?
Yes.
What did you have in your hand?
A small knife.
Small knife? Okay. Did you not mean to stab her?
No, I didn't know.
But once you did you just overreact after that? Taking out frustration?
I wanted it to stop.
You kept stabbing her until you stopped, right? How many times do you think that happened?
Like 5, maybe 6 times. Everything felt cursed at that moment. I was very upset. And I did not feel I was in a safe place. And my entire life I've been I've been a victim. Like, I love my mom and I love my dad, but the things they put me through, the emotionals, the stress that kept building up, everything just was too much. At that point, I was willing to die. I was willing to pay for all of it and just, you know, it'll catch up to me sooner or later.
Again, there's more there that's not addressed. I mean, again, he's lied about so much. I don't think what he's saying is clearly not the truth. If he truly wanted to get away from her, he could have. he hung his head a little bit like he was finally admitting something. You know, I don't know if I can consider that shame, or it's definitely not empathy. It's like, oh, I got caught. I mean, this is Matthew lying.
Do you remember where you stabbed her?
In the neck.
All 6 times?
Let's say so, yeah. After I saw the light, I saw light in her eyes, and I said no more. I didn't want to. I had a good life, but
The only remorse I heard in that clip, I thought I heard him say, I had a good life. What a selfish position to take. Still, I'm looking for remorse for what he did to his mother. Not, oh, look what I've done to my life. I'm not seeing that. I don't understand it. Betty's husband's brother, who was a paraplegic, it was Matthew's job to care for him. Well, he was in his room, and this is all I'm getting from the news reports, while the house was ablaze. His demise would have been to have been burned alive, and he couldn't do anything to save himself. What he did to his mother was a terrible, terrible crime. And then do something that's going to cause a paraplegic to burn to death. I can't even fathom that.
And was your uncle there when the fire happened?
yes,
But your uncle can walk.
no,
And what happened to your uncle?
I don't know. I don't know. I didn't look back.
You know, I mean, it seems to me like this should weigh heavy on him, and it doesn't. You know, I mean, he clearly murdered his mom. He was almost blaming it like something took over and he couldn't stop himself. Don't know what that was. I still can't imagine, because, yeah, Betty and I didn't get along there at the end, but who would wish someone to be murdered and go through the pain of and knowing that your child is doing it? It's just unimaginable to me. And he knows that if he set a house on fire, that Chris was going to die. He couldn't save himself. I have not spoken with him at all. After the sentencing, I got my information to him so that he could call me, and he's at liberty to make phone calls and such. But I don't know where he is in his head. I don't know where his mind is now. Last I heard, he was threatening to kill me. I hope and pray that Matthew has that kind of moment where he realizes that he's hurt people and realizes that he needs to seek forgiveness. I just hope for that. pray for that.
And do you think that people can be forgiven for their sins?
If you can't be forgiven for your sins, then we're all in a world of trouble. I've already forgiven him. I loved him the moment I held him in my arms at birth. You know, my love for him has never changed. Despite what he's done, that doesn't change the fact that I love him. It's my son. I love him.
The rain started just after midnight, thin at first, barely visible beneath the orange highway lights outside Blackwater County, Texas. By 2 a.m, the storm had swallowed the roads whole. Truck tires hissed across flooded asphalt. Neon signs flickered over empty gas stations. Somewhere near Route 81, a payphone rang again and again inside a deserted convenience store, unanswered, echoing into the dark like a warning nobody heard in time. 23-year-old Melissa Grant disappeared less than 40 minutes later. Nobody noticed at first. That was the part people never forgot. Melissa was the kind of woman small towns remember forever. Blonde hair always tied back in a careless knot. Denim jacket. White sneakers. Loud laugh. She worked late shifts at a roadside diner called Wanda's Grill, pouring burnt coffee for truckers drifting through central Texas at impossible hours. She knew almost every regular by name. She remembered birthdays. She carried photographs of her younger brother inside her wallet because he was stationed overseas with the Marines. People trusted her immediately. That was why the disappearance poisoned the town so deeply. Women like Melissa were not supposed to vanish. At 1:13 a.m., security cameras captured her wiping down the diner counter while an old country song played through blown-out speakers overhead. At 1:26, she stepped outside carrying a trash bag toward the dumpster behind the building. At 1:28, headlights appeared briefly across the edge of the frame. At 1:29, the footage glitched. Melissa never came back inside. By sunrise, Wanda herself called the sheriff's office. Deputies arrived expecting a runaway story, maybe a bad breakup, maybe drugs, maybe another young adult escaping a dead-end town. But Melissa's purse was still under the register. Her cigarettes sat untouched beside the coffee machine. Her paycheck remained folded inside her locker. One deputy later admitted the silence inside the diner felt wrong the second he walked in. Not empty. Wrong. Outside, rainwater pooled behind the dumpster. Tire tracks cut through the mud. One white sneaker lay half buried near the fence. The other was never found. News spread fast across Blackwater County. By noon, volunteer search teams combed drainage ditches and empty ranch land. Helicopters swept over miles of soaked farmland. Dogs picked up Melissa's scent near the rear parking lot, followed it 30 yards toward the highway, then stopped cold. As if she had vanished into thin air. The first theory sounded simple enough. Abduction. Wrong place. Wrong time. Interstate predator. Texas highways had become graveyards before. Detectives pulled records from neighboring counties, comparing disappearances, assaults, parolees, drifters. They found nothing. No witnesses reported screams. No blood appeared at the scene. No fingerprints except employees and customers. Then came the phone call. 3 days after Melissa vanished, her mother answered the house phone just before midnight. At first she heard static. Then breathing. Slow. Wet. Mechanical. She demanded to know who was there. For 7 seconds, silence filled the line. Then a man whispered 4 words. She shouldn't have lied. The call disconnected. Police traced it to a payphone outside a closed motel nearly 60 miles away. No prints. No witnesses. No surveillance. The investigation exploded overnight. Reporters crowded outside the sheriff's department. Satellite vans lined Main Street. National tabloids called Melissa the ghost girl of Blackwater. Psychics flooded town claiming visions from God. Rumors spread faster than facts. Some said Melissa had been having an affair with a married man. Others claimed she was secretly pregnant. One story insisted she had witnessed a drug exchange behind the diner weeks before disappearing. Every theory sounded believable for exactly 5 minutes before collapsing under scrutiny. Detective Ray Navarro did not trust any of them. Navarro had spent 19 years chasing violent offenders across Texas. Heavy set. Quiet. Smoked too much. Divorced twice. He walked into crime scenes like a man already expecting disappointment. But Melissa's case bothered him immediately. Something about the timing felt staged. Deliberate. Whoever took her knew exactly when the diner would be empty. He spent days reviewing the damaged security footage frame by frame. At first, there was nothing. Then he saw it. A reflection. Barely visible in the rain-slicked diner window. A dark pickup truck parked near the rear fence. No plates visible. No driver visible. But the truck had one distinctive detail. A cracked left headlight. Navarro released the information publicly, hoping someone would recognize it. Hundreds of tips flooded the hotline within hours. Angry ex-boyfriends. Drunk ranchers. Men accused by neighbors over personal grudges. Deputies chased every lead until exhaustion blurred into obsession. Still nothing. Then a hunter discovered the body. 8 miles north of Blackwater. Shallow creek bed. Partially covered with branches. The call came in at 5:42 a.m. By 6:30, crime scene tape stretched across muddy woodland while photographers documented every inch of the nightmare. Melissa Grant lay face down near the waterline. Her wrists bound. Bruises around her throat. One eye swollen shut. The county coroner estimated she had been dead less than 24 hours. Which meant one horrifying thing. Melissa had been alive for days after disappearing. The autopsy uncovered more questions than answers. Signs of restraint. Evidence suggesting she had been held somewhere enclosed. Fibers from industrial carpeting embedded in her clothing. Traces of motor oil beneath her fingernails. Most disturbing of all, investigators recovered male DNA. In 1998, that should have been the breakthrough. Instead, it became the beginning of the nightmare. DNA technology at the time was inconsistent, expensive, painfully limited. The sample was partial, degraded, contaminated by rain exposure, and handling errors at the crime scene. Detectives submitted it anyway, hoping for a miracle. No matches. Weeks turned into months. Melissa's funeral drew nearly the entire county. Television crews filmed mourners crying beneath gray skies while ministers spoke about evil lurking among ordinary people. Parents stopped letting children walk home alone. Businesses closed earlier. Women carried knives inside purses. Blackwater changed after Melissa died. Fear moved in permanently. Then came the second victim. 17-year-old Carla Mendez vanished while driving home from a friend's birthday party 4 months later. Her abandoned Honda Civic appeared beside a farm road 20 miles east of town. Driver's door open. Engine still warm. Purse untouched. Deputies found drag marks in the dirt nearby. 3 days later, Carla's body surfaced in a flooded quarry. Bound wrists. Bruising around the throat. Same ligature pattern. Same industrial carpet fibers. Texas newspapers erupted. Blackwater serial killer? Second girl found dead. Cold case terror grows. Panic spread beyond county lines. State investigators joined the hunt. FBI profilers arrived in pressed suits carrying psychological assessments that sounded terrifyingly clinical. Male offender. Organized. Socially functional. Likely familiar with victims' routines. Comfortable with control. Comfortable with violence. Navarro hated profilers, but even he admitted one detail chilled him. The killer was likely local. That possibility infected the town like disease. Every mechanic became suspicious. Every truck owner drew stares. Church attendance surged while trust collapsed entirely. Husbands accused neighbors. Parents monitored daughters constantly. Rumors destroyed marriages. And still the killer stayed invisible. Investigators identified 37 possible suspects over the next year. One committed suicide during questioning, instantly fueling speculation. Another fled Texas after police searched his property. A truck driver confessed drunkenly to both murders before retracting the statement and proving he was in Oklahoma during Carla's disappearance. The case became chaos. Evidence rooms overflowed. Tip lines burned nonstop. Nothing stuck. Then detectives uncovered the first truly disturbing clue. Both Melissa and Carla had received anonymous calls in the weeks before they vanished. Short calls. Silence. Breathing. Sometimes music playing faintly in the background. An analyst enhanced one voicemail left on Carla's answering machine. Under the static, barely audible, investigators identified an old country song. The exact same song playing inside Wanda's grill the night Melissa disappeared. Suddenly the investigation narrowed toward someone connected to the diner. Employees were interrogated repeatedly. Former workers. Suppliers. Regular customers. Wanda herself submitted fingerprints voluntarily. Detectives rebuilt timelines down to individual receipts and coffee refills. One name surfaced constantly. Eddie Vale, 34 years old. Local mechanic. Former Army reservist. Known for explosive temper. Owned a dark pickup truck. Cracked left headlight. When deputies questioned him, Eddie remained calm, almost unnaturally calm. He admitted visiting the diner often. Admitted knowing Melissa casually. Claimed the damaged headlight came from hitting a deer weeks earlier. His alibi sounded solid. Friends placed him at a poker game the night Melissa vanished. Still, Navarro did not buy it. Something about Eddie felt rehearsed. Too careful. Detectives searched his garage under warrant authority. Motor oil everywhere. Industrial carpet scraps. Rope. No blood. No forensic link. No arrest. The community exploded in outrage after Eddie walked free. People screamed outside the courthouse. Someone spray-painted killer across his garage door. Local radio stations practically convicted him nightly. But suspicion is not evidence. Navarro knew that better than anyone. And somewhere behind all the chaos, another possibility haunted him. What if they were chasing the wrong man entirely? Because killers who survive this long usually make one critical mistake. But this one never did. Years passed. Leads dried up. Evidence degraded. Witnesses changed stories. Some moved away. Some died. The task force dissolved in 2002. Melissa Grant's file officially became a cold case. Boxes of photographs and reports disappeared into county storage beneath buzzing fluorescent lights. Detectives retired. Reporters lost interest. New crimes replaced old nightmares. But Blackwater never forgot. Every anniversary reopened the wound. Melissa's mother still answered unknown phone numbers hoping for answers. Carla's father drank himself into an early grave. And Detective Ray Navarro kept one photograph locked inside his desk drawer for the next 17 years. The cracked headlight. Because he remained convinced the killer had stood directly in front of them the entire time. Waiting. Watching. A ghost hiding in plain sight. 17 years after Melissa Grant disappeared into the rain behind Wanda's grill, Blackwater County looked almost unchanged from the outside. Same faded storefronts. Same empty roads stretching across dry Texas land. Same rusted water tower standing above town like a silent witness that refused to speak. But beneath the ordinary surface, the murders never loosened their grip. People still locked doors before sunset. Parents still warned daughters not to stop for stranded drivers. Even teenagers born years after the killings knew the story by heart. The Blackwater murders were no longer just crimes. They had become folklore. Old men at gas stations still argued about Eddie Vale over black coffee. Some swore he was guilty. Others believed investigators ruined an innocent man because they were desperate for a monster. Eddie himself never left town. That unsettled people more than if he had disappeared. Every morning he opened his repair garage at exactly 7. Same cigarettes. Same stained coveralls. Same unreadable expression whenever anyone mentioned Melissa Grant. Detective Ray Navarro retired in 2010 with 2 failed marriages, high blood pressure, and 32 cardboard boxes filled with unsolved case files stacked inside his garage. He told reporters the same thing every time they asked about Blackwater. The killer's still out there. Most people assumed it was bitterness talking. Navarro knew better, because he never stopped working the case. Retirement only gave him more time to obsess. He reviewed witness statements at 3 a.m. He pinned photographs across spare bedroom walls. He drove old highway routes searching for details everyone else overlooked years earlier. Some nights he parked outside Wanda's grill, now abandoned and boarded shut, staring at the cracked parking lot while moths circled the broken neon sign overhead. Something about the original timeline still bothered him. Too precise. Too clean. Melissa vanished in under 3 minutes during a thunderstorm without witnesses, screams, or evidence left behind except one shoe. That required planning, familiarity, confidence. The killer knew the diner schedule, knew the cameras, knew exactly where to park. Which meant one terrifying possibility remained alive after all these years. Melissa may not have been chosen randomly. That theory returned violently in October 2015 when a documentary crew arrived in Blackwater to film a television special about unsolved Texas cold cases. Producers interviewed retired deputies, former witnesses, grieving relatives. The town hated the attention immediately. Strangers wandered cemeteries taking photographs. Tourists drove past the creek bed where Melissa's body had been discovered. Someone even stole flowers from Carla Mendez's grave as a sick souvenir. Then the anonymous letters started arriving. First one went to the local newspaper. You missed something. No return address. No fingerprints. Typed on plain white paper. A week later, Melissa's younger brother Daniel received another. Ask Navarro about the janitor. Again and signed. Again impossible to trace. By the third letter, panic returned to Blackwater like a storm rolling back across old scars. He was never alone. Navarro nearly dropped the page when he read those words. Because buried deep inside the original investigation sat a detail almost everyone had forgotten. The janitor. Frank Delaney. 58 years old in 1998. Quiet. Alcoholic. Worked overnight maintenance shifts at Wanda's Grill for extra cash. Investigators questioned him briefly after Melissa disappeared because he claimed he saw a dark truck near the diner before the storm intensified. But Delaney's testimony changed repeatedly. Sometimes he described one man inside the truck. Sometimes two. Eventually detectives dismissed him as unreliable because he drank heavily and suffered memory blackouts. 3 months after Carla Mendez was murdered, Frank Delaney died from liver failure. Case closed. Or so they thought. Navarro dug through old evidence boxes until dawn searching for Delaney's original statements. Dust covered everything. The paper smelled old, brittle, forgotten. Then he found it. Interview transcript. February 2, 1998. One sentence highlighted in red pen. The passenger looked nervous. Passenger. Not driver. Passenger. Navarro stared at the words for nearly a full minute without blinking. If Delaney told the truth that night, then investigators spent 17 years hunting one killer while possibly ignoring another person sitting inside the truck during Melissa's abduction. Un complice. Or a witness. The documentary aired nationally 2 weeks later. Phone lines exploded afterward. Hundreds of new tips flooded Blackwater County Sheriff's Office. Most were garbage. Psychics. Conspiracy theories. False confessions from unstable strangers craving attention. But one call changed everything. A woman from Louisiana claimed her ex-husband once owned a dark pickup truck with a cracked left headlight. And his best friend was Eddie Vale. The ex-husband's name was Travis Bell. Former oil field worker. Violent history. Arrested twice for assault. Dead since 2006 after a bar fight outside Houston. Investigators initially dismissed the connection because Bell had never appeared prominently in the original case files. But Navarro pushed harder. He requested archived records, financial statements, employment logs. The deeper he looked, the stranger things became. Travis Bell and Eddie Vale worked together briefly at an industrial equipment warehouse 6 months before Melissa disappeared. The warehouse flooring used industrial carpeting identical to fibers recovered from both victims. Navarro felt the cold rush immediately. After nearly 2 decades, the case finally moved again. Sheriff deputies reopened the evidence vault under state authorization. Modern forensic analysts examined preserved materials using technology unavailable in 1998. DNA extraction methods had evolved dramatically. Samples once considered useless could now reveal entire genetic profiles from microscopic traces. For the first time in years, Blackwater felt hope. Then came the shock. The original DNA sample recovered beneath Melissa's fingernails did not belong to Eddie Vale. Not even close. The lab confirmed it twice. Different genetic markers. Different bloodline. Different man entirely. Navarro sat motionless inside the forensic office while analysts explained the results. Around him, computers hummed quietly beneath sterile fluorescent lighting. 17 years of assumptions collapsed in seconds. Eddie Vale may have been innocent. Or worse. He may have been only part of the story. The DNA profile was uploaded into CODIS, the National Criminal Database. Analysts expected another dead end. Instead, the system returned a partial familial match within 48 hours. Not the killer. A relative. The match connected to a convicted burglar in Oklahoma named Shane Bell. Travis Bell's younger cousin. Suddenly the investigation exploded again. Reporters flooded Blackwater overnight after leaked information reached the press. National headlines returned immediately. Texas cold case DNA breakthrough. New suspects in Blackwater murders. Investigators stunned by forensic match. Navarro ignored the cameras completely. He drove straight to Oklahoma with 2 state investigators and spent 11 straight hours reviewing the Bell family history. Violence everywhere. Domestic assaults. Drug arrests. animal cruelty complaints. One disturbing pattern repeated constantly through police records. Women reporting harassment, stalking, threatening phone calls, then disappearing from town shortly afterward. Not murdered, not officially connected to Blackwater, but enough to make experienced detectives deeply uncomfortable. Shane Bell denied everything immediately when questioned. Nervous eyes, sweating hands, smelled strongly of cigarettes and gasoline. He admitted Travis and Eddie were close friends during the late 90s. Admitted visiting Blackwater several times. But he insisted he knew nothing about Melissa Grant or Carla Mendez. Then investigators asked about the truck. Shane froze. Just briefly. But Navarro noticed. The old detective leaned across the table slowly, studying every twitch in the man's face. What happened to Travis's pickup? Shane licked his lips. Said he didn't know. Navarro slid an evidence photograph across the table. Cracked headlight. Mud-covered wheel well. Blackwater County. Shane stared too long before answering. And that was enough. Police obtained warrants within days. They searched an abandoned property once owned by Travis Bell outside Amarillo. The house sat isolated beyond miles of dead grass and rusted fencing. Windows shattered. Roof collapsing inward. Rats nesting through rotted furniture. At first glance, nothing connected it to the murders. Then cadaver dogs alerted near an old storage shed behind the house. Investigators dug carefully beneath packed dirt. 3 feet down, they uncovered rope fragments. 4 feet down, they found women's jewelry. 5 feet down, the shovel-struck bone. The entire site shut down immediately. Floodlights illuminated the property through the night, while forensic teams worked beneath swarming insects and suffocating heat. Reporters gathered behind police barricades desperate for answers. Helicopters circled overhead. By morning, investigators confirmed the remains belonged to an unidentified female between 18 and 25 years old. Not Melissa. Not Carla. Someone else. Someone nobody had been searching for. Blackwater descended into panic all over again. If Bell connected to another body, how many victims existed beyond the original murders? And how had investigators missed him for so long? Navarro barely slept during the following week. Every discovery widened the nightmare further. Phone records revealed Travis Bell called Wanda's Grill repeatedly during January 1998. Employment files showed Melissa briefly dated a worker from the same warehouse where Bell and Eddie Vale were employed. Detectives tracked down former co-workers who described Bell as charming one moment, explosive the next. One witness remembered Bell making a disturbing joke months before Melissa vanished. Nobody ever finds the quiet girls. Another former employee recalled hearing Eddie and Travis arguing violently behind the warehouse days after Carla Mendez disappeared. Nobody remembered what they argued about. But one sentence stood out. She saw your face. Navarro replayed that line endlessly inside his head. Because suddenly the case looked completely different. Not random. Not opportunistic. Personal. Melissa may have recognized her killer. Which explained the speed. The confidence. The silence. Then forensic analysts made the discovery that changed everything. Using advanced touch DNA testing unavailable in the late 90s, they identified a second partial profile on Melissa's jacket. Female. Unknown. Not Melissa. Not Carla. A woman had direct physical contact with the victim shortly before death. The revelation stunned investigators. Until that moment, every theory centered around male offenders. Now the possibility of female involvement cracked the investigation wide open again. Navarro returned to old witness interviews, searching desperately for overlooked names. Then he found her. Rachel Bell. Travis Bell's younger sister. Worked briefly at Wanda's Grill in late 1997. Quit suddenly 1 month before Melissa disappeared. Interviewed once. Never investigated further. The original notes described her as quiet but cooperative. One line from the interview made Navarro's stomach tighten instantly. She mentioned Melissa seemed afraid of someone recently. Afraid of who? The report never said. Because nobody followed up. Navarro slammed the file shut so hard dust exploded across the room. Years. 17 wasted years. And now ghosts long buried beneath old paperwork were clawing back into daylight one piece at a time. Meanwhile, Blackwater itself started unraveling under the pressure. Elderly residents carried guns openly again. Talk radio accused police of corruption and incompetence. Conspiracy theories spread online claiming deputies protected killers for decades. Melissa's mother stopped speaking to journalists entirely after receiving threatening messages from strangers accusing her daughter of hiding secrets before her death. Then came the final shock. Rachel Bell disappeared. 3 days after investigators announced renewed interest in the Bell family connection, Rachel failed to report for work at a nursing home outside Dallas. Her apartment showed signs of panic. Front door left unlocked. Coffee maker still running. Purse abandoned beside the couch. And on the kitchen table, investigators found one sentence written on a torn piece of notebook paper. He said the river keeps everything. No signature. No explanation. Just those 6 words. And somewhere far beyond Blackwater County, beneath endless Texas darkness, Detective Ray Navarro realized with growing horror that the cold case they thought was finally breaking open might actually be something far larger. Something uglier. Something that had survived hidden for nearly 20 years without anyone understanding what truly happened the night Melissa Grant vanished into the rain behind Wanda's grill. Rain returned to Blackwater County like it had been waiting for permission. Not the violent storm of 1998, but a slower, heavier rain, the kind that soaked into the ground and refused to leave. It turned dirt roads into black mirrors and made old memories feel closer than they should have been. Every drop seemed to press down on the town, as if the past itself was rising back through the soil. Rachel Bell's disappearance changed everything. Because now the case was no longer just about what happened in 1998. It was about what was still happening. Detective Ray Navarro arrived in Dallas within hours, sitting inside Rachel Bell's apartment under harsh overhead lighting that made every detail look too sharp, too deliberate. The place was ordinary in the most unsettling way. A half-folded blanket on the couch. A mug with dried coffee rings. A television left on mute. Nothing overturned. Nothing stolen. No sign of struggle that made sense. Only absence arranged too neatly to be random. But Navarro had seen this pattern before. Control without chaos. That was never panic. That was design. A forensic team documented everything while Navarro moved slowly through the rooms, stopping at the kitchen table where the note had been found. The paper was cheap, torn unevenly, written in hurried ink. He said the river keeps everything. Navarro read it again and again, as if repetition could unlock meaning. Rivers didn't speak. Rivers didn't remember. But people did. People used rivers when they wanted things to disappear. Outside, reporters were already gathering behind police tape. Someone shouted Melissa Grant's name like it was still fresh news. That was when Navarro realized something had shifted in the public perception of Blackwater. The case was no longer cold. It was warming up again, dangerously alive, feeding on attention the way old wounds feed on pressure. Back in Texas, evidence rooms reopened like sealed coffins. The Bell family file expanded overnight. Rachel Bell was no longer just a missing person. She became a potential bridge between 2 decades of unanswered questions. Her employment records at Wanda's Grill resurfaced, showing she had worked night shifts alongside Melissa Grant for nearly 6 weeks before quitting without notice. 6 weeks that investigators in 1998 had barely documented. 6 weeks that suddenly mattered more than anything else. Navarro replayed old interviews with surviving staff members from the diner. Most were routine. Nobody remembered anything unusual. But one sentence kept surfacing in different forms, spoken by different people, always dismissed at the time. Rachel and Melissa didn't talk much. They said it like it meant nothing. Now it sounded like everything. A breakthrough came from a storage facility outside Amarillo, where evidence from the original case had been moved after the task force dissolved. Boxes were mislabeled. Files stacked without order. Years of negligence buried under dust and fluorescent hum. Navarro spent 2 nights there without leaving. On the 3rd morning, he found a folder marked Incident Log, Wanda's Grill, Supplemental. Inside was a handwritten statement never entered into the official report. A truck stop cashier 50 miles outside Blackwater had reported seeing Melissa Grant the night she vanished. Not alone. Not struggling. Sitting inside a dark pickup truck, passenger side, talking to a woman in the driver's seat. The cashier had described the woman as calm. Too calm. Blonde hair tied back. Denim jacket. White sneakers. Navarro's breath stopped when he read that line. Because it didn't describe a stranger. It described Rachel Bell. The report had been flagged as unreliable in 1998. Witness confidence low. No follow-up conducted. Case dismissed. Navarro stared at the page until the edges of the paper blurred. If true, it meant Melissa did not vanish into violence in the parking lot behind Wanda's grill. She left with someone she knew, someone she trusted, or someone who had already been inside her life long enough to make trust irrelevant. That night, Navarro made a decision that went against every procedural instinct he had ever learned. He stopped treating the Bell family as suspects in isolation and began treating them as a network. He pulled employment records, phone logs, and travel data across 3 states. The pattern that emerged was subtle at first, almost invisible unless viewed all at once. Travis Bell moved between oil field jobs and short-term labor contracts, always near highway corridors leading into Blackwater. Eddie Vale's truck appeared in traffic camera archives in counties surrounding Melissa's disappearance route. Shane Bell's financial records showed unexplained cash deposits in early 1998. And Rachel Bell's presence, until she disappeared, acted like a silent anchor connecting them all. But there was something else. A gap. A missing presence in every timeline reconstruction. Someone who appeared only indirectly. Never questioned deeply. Never fully mapped. Navarro found her name again in a secondary witness file from Carla Mendez's case. A waitress from a truck stop diner outside Odessa had reported seeing Carla the night she disappeared. The report mentioned a second figure inside the vehicle Carla had been seen approaching before vanishing from sight. A woman. Same description again. Blonde hair. Calm demeanor. No urgency. No fear. Just presence. At that point, Navarro stopped pretending the pattern was coincidence. 3 victims. 3 sightings involving a woman matching similar physical traits. 1 missing woman now possibly tied to both earlier cases. The theory forming inside his mind was dangerous because it broke every assumption the original investigation had been built on. If Rachel Bell was involved, she was not a witness. Not a victim. Not collateral. She was something else entirely. A participant. Or a guide. The breakthrough came from an old voicemail archive stored in county evidence backups. A technician recovered audio from Melissa Grant's phone records that had never been fully analyzed due to corruption issues in the original tape. Most of it was static. But beneath it, faint and distorted, Navarro heard something that made his skin tighten. A woman's voice. Close to the microphone. Saying only one sentence. "You're already late." The voice was calm. Almost gentle. Then the line ended. Navarro requested enhanced audio processing immediately. Specialists isolated frequencies, removed interference layers, and confirmed the voice did not belong to Melissa Grant or any known female associates listed in the original investigation. The system ran comparative analysis across archived witness interviews. Match probability returned low, but not 0. There was a partial overlap with Rachel Bell's recorded voice from her 1998 interview. Enough to demand attention. Not enough to convict, but enough to reopen every assumption. Meanwhile, Blackwater was collapsing under renewed scrutiny. The sheriff's office received threats daily. Anonymous messages flooded local stations accusing officers of covering up a network of killers. Social media turned Rachel Bell into a symbol of hidden evil, even without confirmation of her involvement. The town became divided again, split between those who believed justice was finally coming and those who believed history was being rewritten for attention. Then another body was discovered. This time not in Texas. Oklahoma riverbank. Partially submerged. Unidentified female. Estimated time of death, late 1990s. No official name yet. But the pattern was unmistakable. Navarro traveled to the site immediately. The river moved slowly there, thick with sediment and debris. Trees bent toward the water like they were listening. Forensic teams worked in silence, lifting remains carefully from the mud. When Navarro saw the evidence bag containing personal effects, something inside him shifted coldly. A small silver bracelet. Engraved initials barely visible beneath corrosion. MG. Melissa Grant. Except this body was not Melissa. Dental records confirmed it. Different victim. Different identity. But connected. Somehow. Navarro stepped back from the riverbank, suddenly aware that this case was no longer confined to Blackwater. The geography had expanded. The timeline had fractured. What they were seeing was not a single murder case. It was a sequence. A system. A pattern of movement across state lines that had gone unnoticed for nearly 20 years. That night, Navarro sat alone in a motel room and laid out every piece of evidence across the bed. Photographs. Reports. Maps. Names. Lines began connecting themselves without his input. Roads linking towns. Witness sightings overlapping travel routes. Truck stop encounters forming a loose but undeniable corridor stretching across Texas into Oklahoma and beyond. And at the center of it all, a recurring absence. Rachel Bell. Not always present. Not always visible. But always near the turning point. Always near the moment someone disappeared. Navarro picked up the phone and called the Dallas office handling Rachel's missing person case. The line rang 3 times before connecting. A detective answered. Navarro spoke one sentence. Stop assuming she ran away. A pause. Then silence. Because deep down, everyone already knew what the evidence was starting to suggest, even if nobody wanted to say it out loud. Rachel Bell was not just connected to the disappearances. She might be the only person who had seen every step of what truly happened. And now she was gone. As Navarro ended the call, thunder rolled across the motel parking lot, shaking the windows. He looked out into the rain, imagining highways stretching endlessly in every direction, each one carrying secrets buried under years of dust and forgetting. Somewhere out there, the truth was still moving, still unfinished, still waiting to be found. The rain followed Navarro back to Texas like it had attached itself to the case, a constant presence that refused to let the ground dry long enough for anything to be buried properly. By the time he reached Blackwater again, the town felt different in a way no one could quite explain. It wasn't louder. It wasn't busier. It was more alert, as if every house, every window, every cracked sidewalk had started paying attention again. Rachel Bell's disappearance had changed the temperature of the investigation. And now, after the discovery by the river, it had changed the rules. Navarro didn't go home. He went straight to the sheriff's office, where the case files had been pulled from storage and stacked across multiple tables like a collapsing archive of forgotten lives. New investigators had joined the case, younger agents trained in modern forensic protocols, but none of them spoke much when Navarro entered. They knew his reputation. They knew what it meant when he stopped asking permission and started moving on instinct. He laid the Riverbank report on the table. The unidentified female. The bracelet marked MG. The confirmed mismatch. No one spoke for several seconds. Finally, one of the analysts broke the silence. If that isn't Melissa Grant, then who is it? No one answered. Because the question wasn't just unsettling. It was expanding. If Melissa wasn't the only body tied to the system they were uncovering, then the Bell family was no longer just connected to 1 or 2 murders. They were connected to something wider. Something structured. Something repeated. Navarro began reconstructing the timeline again, but this time he stopped thinking in terms of victims and started thinking in terms of movement. Who traveled? Who had access? Who appeared in multiple counties without stable employment records? Who could cross state lines without leaving obvious traces? And every path, no matter how he adjusted it, kept pulling him back toward one detail that never fully fit anywhere else. The passenger seat. Frank Delaney's original statement. The janitor who said there was someone else in the truck. A passenger. Navarro had dismissed it years ago because Delaney's credibility had been compromised by alcohol, inconsistency, and time. But now, with Rachel Bell missing and new bodies appearing outside Texas, that single word started to feel less like confusion and more like the missing axis of the entire case. Passenger meant observation. Passenger meant proximity. Passenger meant someone who was present during the crime without necessarily being the one who initiated it. And that changed everything. Because it suggested coordination. Inside Wanda's grill, the building still stood abandoned behind yellow caution tape, waiting for demolition approval that had been delayed for years due to legal disputes and local resistance. Navarro requested temporary access. The request was approved within hours. Walking inside felt like stepping into a paused moment that refused to move forward. The air was stale. Dust coated every surface. The smell of old grease still lingered faintly beneath time itself. He stood behind the counter where Melissa Grant had been seen on camera the night she disappeared. The exact position. The exact angle. The exact silence. And then he noticed something he had never been able to see clearly in the original footage. A reflection pattern. The window behind the counter still had faint marks where rain once hit the glass unevenly during the storm of 1998. Navarro aligned his view with the original camera angle and suddenly understood what the distortion had been hiding. There were 2 silhouettes near the truck. Not one. Not a driver and an empty passenger seat. 2 people. One entering the vehicle. One already inside. Navarro stepped back slowly. Because that meant Melissa did not walk into a stranger's trap alone. She entered a situation that already had structure, already had roles, already had someone waiting inside. The next day, forensic linguistics experts analyzed every recovered voicemail tied to both Melissa Grant and Carla Mendez. The results created a pattern no one had previously noticed. The anonymous calls were not random silence or breathing patterns. They followed timing intervals, pauses, repeated structures. One analyst described it as controlled communication without words, as if someone was testing response behavior, observing reaction, measuring fear. Then came the most disturbing correlation. Every voicemail with the same background country song, the one tied to Wanda's grill, appeared within a narrow time window before each disappearance. Not days, hours. Navarro felt the case tightening around something he could finally almost see. The Bell family was interrogated again. This time the tone had changed. No longer suspicion, now urgency. Eddie Vale was brought in under formal questioning and confronted with the updated DNA findings and riverbank discovery. For the first time in years, cracks appeared in his composure. Small at first, a hesitation too long, a breath held too carefully. But still he denied involvement. Travis Bell, dead since 2006, remained a shadow across every file. Shane Bell, now under federal observation, refused to speak beyond legal minimums. But it was Rachel Bell's absence that dominated every conversation. Because missing people create voids that investigators try to fill with assumptions, and those assumptions now pointed in too many directions at once. That night, Navarro received a call from an unknown number. No caller ID. No background noise. Just breathing. He didn't speak. Neither did the caller. Then, after several seconds, a woman's voice came through the line. Calm. Unhurried. Familiar in a way that made Navarro's instincts sharpen immediately. You're looking in the wrong place. The line went dead. Navarro sat still for a long time afterward, staring at the phone as if it might ring again and explain itself. But it didn't. Instead, something else arrived. A message delivered to the sheriff's office fax machine at 3:12 a.m. A map. Hand-drawn. Old highway routes. Marked locations across Texas and Oklahoma. And at the center of it all, one word written in block letters. Return. By sunrise, investigators had traced the map's layout to abandoned freight corridors used in the late 1990s for regional trucking routes that bypassed main inspection highways. Routes that allowed vehicles to move between rural towns without consistent tracking. Routes that connected directly to Blackwater. Navarro realized then that the case was no longer just about identifying killers. It was about understanding movement across invisible infrastructure. Someone had been using the gaps between systems, between jurisdictions, between attention spans, and they had been doing it long enough that the pattern itself had become hidden in plain sight. When Navarro returned to the evidence room, he pulled every photograph tied to truck sightings from 1998 onward. He pinned them across the wall, aligning dates, times, weather conditions, witness descriptions. Slowly, a shape formed. Not a person. A route. A repeated loop across multiple counties. And every loop intersected near one recurring point. An abandoned rest area outside Blackwater. One that had been closed officially in 1997 due to budget cuts and highway rerouting. Navarro requested immediate access. The site had never been fully investigated during the original case, because at the time it was assumed irrelevant. Now it was the only place left that connected every thread. When he arrived at the rest area, the silence felt heavier than expected. Broken asphalt, rusted picnic tables, trees grown too close to the road, wind moving through empty structures like it was testing what remained. Forensics teams arrived shortly after. Ground scans began immediately. Within 2 hours, the first anomaly appeared. Metallic density beneath the soil. Too structured to be natural. Excavation began carefully. Navarro stood at the edge of the site, watching the ground open slowly after decades of closure. And as the earth gave way, revealing something buried beneath years of forgetting, he finally understood the scale of what they had uncovered. This was not where the story ended. It was where it had always been returning to. Something beneath Blackwater had been waiting. Not hidden, just untouched. And now, after 17 years of silence, it was starting to surface again. The excavation at the abandoned rest area outside Blackwater didn't feel like discovery at first. It felt like intrusion. Every layer of soil removed carried the same uneasy resistance, as if the ground itself was reluctant to reveal what had been sealed beneath it for decades. Wind moved through the broken structures of the old stop, scraping against rusted metal signs that once promised rest, food, safety. Words that now sounded like a cruel joke. Navarro stood at the edge of the dig site, watching floodlights carve sharp angles through the darkness. Forensics teams worked in disciplined silence, but even discipline couldn't hide the tension. Everyone there understood they were not just digging for evidence anymore. They were digging into something that had survived time, weather, and oversight, and possibly intent. The first object recovered was small, a fragment of fabric, brittle and discolored, caught on a root like it had been trying to stay hidden even as the earth shifted around it. Then came metal, rusted, bent, indistinct at first, until someone brushed away enough soil to reveal part of a structure. A hinge. A latch. Something that once belonged to containment rather than chance. Navarro felt the shift before anyone spoke. This wasn't debris. It was constructed. By midnight, the site had expanded into a controlled excavation zone. Reports were being transmitted directly to state investigators. What had started as a long-shot search tied to cold case leads was now something else entirely. An active archaeological crime scene buried under a highway system that had been rerouted and forgotten. Then the second layer broke open. Wood. Old reinforced wood. Not natural placement. Not erosion pattern. Nails still intact in places where corrosion should have claimed everything. The structure beneath the soil suggested deliberate assembly, something built with purpose, and then sealed away under calculated conditions. One of the younger analysts finally broke the silence. This wasn't a dumping ground. Navarro didn't respond immediately. He was staring at the alignment of wood beams emerging from the dirt, recognizing something in the geometry that made his stomach tighten. "Say it clearly," he said. The analyst hesitated. It was a room. The word didn't belong in that space. It didn't belong under that highway. But as more soil was removed, the reality of it became unavoidable. Walls. Reinforced sections. A confined structure built below ground level, hidden beneath what had once been a public rest stop. A space designed for control. Containment. Duration. And then came the smell. Old. Metallic. Preserved in absence of air. Even after decades, even through layers of earth, it carried something that made several investigators step back instinctively. Navarro didn't move. He had learned long ago that hesitation was where answers went to die. The structure was fully exposed by early morning. A subterranean enclosure no larger than a small storage unit, reinforced with industrial materials that matched fibers found on both Melissa Grant and Carla Mendez. Inside, forensic teams discovered restraints still fixed to anchor points in the floor. Not broken. Not improvised. Installed. Purpose-built. There were markings on the interior walls, scratches, indentations, faint impressions that suggested repeated presence over time. Not a single incident. Not a one-time use. Repeated occupancy. Navarro stepped inside when clearance was finally given. The air felt wrong immediately, like it had been waiting for him specifically. Flashlights cut across surfaces that had not seen light in decades. The walls absorbed it rather than reflecting it, swallowing detail in places where detail mattered most. He crouched near one of the anchor points. Metal ring. Heavy gauge. Industrial grade. The kind used in warehouses. The kind used in transport facilities. The kind that matched Bell family employment records. But what froze him wasn't the hardware. It was the pattern. The placement of restraints wasn't random. They followed spacing that suggested multiple occupants at different times. The room wasn't built for storage. It was built for rotation. A cycle. Navarro stood slowly, his mind assembling what the evidence refused to deny anymore. This was not a single abduction site. It was a node, part of something larger. A system that moved people through locations not in isolation but in sequence. And if that was true, then Melissa Grant had not been an isolated victim. She had been part of a chain. The second revelation came later that morning when soil samples from the structure were analyzed for chemical residues. Traces of sedatives were identified in microscopic concentrations embedded within the wood. Compounds used to suppress awareness over extended periods. Not lethal. Not immediate. Controlled. Measured. Intentional. Navarro felt something tighten in his chest as the analysis continued. This wasn't impulsive violence. It was managed, which meant the people involved were not acting under chaos or emotional breakdown. They were operating with consistency. That idea was more disturbing than anything else so far. Because consistency meant repetition. And repetition meant scale. By noon, news of the discovery had leaked. Blackwater erupted again. Not with rumor this time. With fear that felt justified. The abandoned rest stop became a sealed perimeter as state police and federal agents converged on the site. Helicopters circled overhead. Satellite vans returned to the same stretch of highway they had once abandoned years earlier. But this time, no one was asking whether Eddie Vale was guilty. The question had changed entirely. How many sites existed like this? Navarro left the excavation zone briefly to review newly surfaced archival records. Highway maintenance logs from the late 1990s revealed something previously overlooked. The rest stop had been decommissioned officially in 1997, but inspection records showed unauthorized maintenance activity continued for several months afterward. Unauthorized but documented. Signed off. Approved. By contractors connected to multiple private transport vendors operating across Texas and Oklahoma. One company name appeared repeatedly. Belridge Logistics. A defunct regional trucking subcontractor that had dissolved quietly in 2001 after bankruptcy proceedings. Navarro traced its ownership structure carefully. On paper, it looked insignificant. But buried within subcontractor listings and employee rosters were familiar names. Travis Bell. Eddie Vale. And, for a brief period, Rachel Bell. The pattern snapped into place with brutal clarity. This wasn't random employment overlap. It was coordinated access. Access to routes. Access to infrastructure. Access to blind zones between jurisdictions. Navarro closed the file slowly. Because now the question was no longer who committed the murders. It was how many people understood the system while it was happening. That night, Navarro returned to the excavation site alone. Official teams had paused operations pending structural reinforcement assessments, but he couldn't stay away. The structure beneath the ground felt different in silence than it did under floodlights. He stood at the edge of the exposed room, listening to wind move across open soil. Then he noticed something new. A secondary marking beneath one of the anchor points. Not a scratch. Not damage. A symbol. Faint. Almost erased. But deliberately carved. A circle intersected by two parallel lines. Navarro had seen it before. Not in official records. In witness sketches from Carla Mendez's case. A drawing made by a surviving friend who described Carla obsessively repeating the same phrase before she disappeared. She said they follow the lines. At the time, it had been dismissed as trauma confusion. Now it looked like navigation. Navarro stepped out of the structure slowly, his mind shifting through possibilities that no longer felt theoretical. If the rest stop was one node, there had to be others. If routes were controlled, they had to converge somewhere. And if Rachel Bell had been part of the system, whether victim, participant, or something in between, then her disappearance wasn't an end point. It was movement. He returned to the command trailer and spread the updated map across the table. New coordinates were added from Belridge Logistics records, adjusted against old highway layouts, overlaid with witness sightings and disappearance timelines. The pattern that emerged this time was unmistakable. A network. Not scattered. Not random. Structured. And at its center, one point kept repeating across every layer of data. A location that had never been investigated because it was never officially part of any jurisdictional report. A freight transfer yard outside the county line, abandoned shortly after 1999, erased from most public records as if it had never fully existed. Navarro stared at it for a long time. Because if the structure beneath the rest stop was one node, then that yard was something else entirely. A convergence point. And somewhere inside that system, still unaccounted for, Rachel Bell was either moving through it or controlling its final direction. The freight transfer yard sat just beyond the edge of official maps, the kind of place that only existed if you already knew it was there. On paper, it had been erased years ago, classified as abandoned industrial land, then quietly absorbed into a redevelopment project that never actually happened. In reality, nothing had been built over it. Nothing had replaced it. It simply remained untouched and unwanted, as if the world had agreed to pretend it no longer mattered. Navarro arrived just before sunrise. The sky over Texas was the color of old steel, heavy and motionless, as if even daylight was hesitant to expose what waited below. The yard was surrounded by a collapsed chain-link fence, half swallowed by weeds and rust. Shipping containers stood in uneven rows like broken teeth. Some were open, some sealed, all of them silent. But silence, Navarro had learned, was never absence. It was storage. He stepped inside the perimeter alone, ignoring the second vehicle that had followed him from the highway. He didn't need confirmation anymore. The pattern had already spoken louder than any witness ever could. The air inside the yard carried something old beneath the dust. Not decay exactly. More like memory compressed into physical space. Every step Navarro took over gravel felt deliberate, as if the ground remembered being used. The first container he inspected was empty. The second held nothing but broken pallets and shredded packaging straps. The third changed everything. Inside, the space was too clean compared to its surroundings. Not abandoned, not forgotten, maintained longer than the others had been. The floor showed faint marks, rectangular impressions where heavy equipment had once been anchored. Bolts still embedded in concrete. Scarring where something had been removed, not destroyed. Navarro crouched slowly, running his flashlight along the floor. Then he saw it. A faint outline in the dust. Parallel drag marks. Controlled spacing. Not random movement. Transport. He stood without speaking, stepping back into the open yard as if distance might clarify what proximity had made worse. Behind him, the wind moved through the containers, producing a low metallic hum that sounded almost intentional. By the time the forensic team arrived, Navarro had already moved toward the far end of the yard where the terrain dipped slightly into a recessed loading zone. There, partially hidden beneath collapsed tarps and overgrown brush, was something that had not been documented in any official inspection. A secondary access point. Not a road. A service corridor. Wide enough for vehicles. Narrow enough to avoid attention. And leading away from the yard toward a cluster of abandoned rural structures, not marked on any modern satellite registry. The system was expanding again in Navarro's mind, no longer as isolated points but as connected movement. The rest stop. The underground structure. The freight yard. All of them forming a sequence rather than separate crimes. Someone had built a route where none should have existed, and used time itself as cover. That realization hardened into urgency when the first evidence team report arrived. Metal fragments recovered from the container matched alloy composition found at the underground structure beneath the rest stop. Same industrial grade. Same manufacturer batch range. Same usage category, transport restraint infrastructure. The implication was immediate. The same system had been reused. Across years. Across locations. Across victims. Navarro felt the weight of it settle differently now. This was no longer about solving a series of disappearances. It was about identifying operational continuity, a mechanism that had survived personnel changes, deaths, dissolutions, and investigations without breaking its rhythm. Which meant it had never depended on a single person. It depended on structure. And structure, once built correctly, does not disappear just because people stop looking at it. By midday, aerial drones were deployed across the expanded perimeter. Thermal scans showed anomalies beneath one of the container clusters. Excavation began again, slower this time, more cautious, as if everyone involved understood they were not uncovering evidence anymore. They were reopening something that had been closed deliberately. Underneath the third container, they found reinforced flooring. Underneath that, a sealed cavity. And inside it, documentation. Not scattered. Organized. Stacked. Binders wrapped in protective plastic, preserved against time in a way that suggested intent rather than accident. Navarro descended into the cavity himself when clearance was given, the flashlight beam cutting through suspended dust like it was slicing through layers of withheld history. He pulled the first binder open. Inside were route logs. Dates. Times. Vehicle identifiers. Stop locations. Handwritten annotations that marked arrivals and departures across multiple years. Not all entries were complete, but enough were intact to reveal a disturbing level of precision. This wasn't tracking. It was scheduling. The second binder contained photographs. Not of victims. Of transitions. Empty vehicles. Empty rooms. Doors open. Doors closed. Intervals between presence and absence captured like routine documentation rather than evidence. The third binder made Navarro stop completely. It contained personnel notes. Names. Observations. Behavioral summaries. And at the center of several entries, repeated in different handwriting styles, one name appeared more than any other. Rachel Bell. Not as a victim. Not as missing. As active notation. Navarro's hand tightened on the edge of the folder. Because the language used in those entries was not investigative. It was operational. Stable during transition. Maintains compliance. Minimal resistance reported. The phrasing was clinical, detached, almost administrative. As if human beings were being processed, not abducted. Navarro closed the binder slowly. The implication was forming now whether he wanted it to or not. Rachel Bell had not simply vanished. She had been recorded, documented, tracked within a system that treated movement as procedure. Then came the fourth binder. And everything changed again. Inside were maps. But not the ones Navarro expected. These weren't geographic references. They were behavioral routes. Patterns drawn across time intervals rather than physical roads. Lines connecting locations not by distance, but by sequence of events. Each line represented movement between states of visibility and invisibility. Presence, absence, reappearance. And at the center of every diagram, one repeating node. Blackwater. Navarro felt something cold settle behind his ribs. Because it meant Blackwater had not been the origin. It had been a recurring point. A return location. A place where cycles began and ended. Which also meant Melissa Grant had not been the first. Or the last. Just one instance in a longer sequence that stretched further than anyone had ever properly traced. A radio crackled outside the cavity, pulling Navarro briefly back to the present. One of the field agents reported a new discovery at the far end of the yard. A buried vehicle frame, partially intact, identified as a late 1990s model pickup truck. Cracked left headlight. Navarro climbed out immediately. The excavation team had already exposed part of the chassis. Rusted, collapsed, but still identifiable. The same type of vehicle described in multiple witness accounts. The same silhouette reflected in Wanda's grill window footage. The same fragment that had followed this entire case from the beginning like a shadow that refused to disappear. Navarro approached slowly. Something about it felt less like discovery and more like arrival. Because vehicles don't just vanish. They end somewhere. And this one had ended exactly where the system suggested it would. At a convergence point. A place where movement stopped long enough for transition to occur. He placed a hand on the metal frame. Cold. Hollow. Then his radio buzzed again. This time from a different team positioned near the northern boundary of the yard. Their voice was tense. Controlled. But unmistakably altered by what they were seeing. Detective Navarro, you need to come see this. He moved without responding. By the time he reached them, the sun had fully risen, casting harsh light across the broken industrial field. The team stood near a partially exposed structure beneath another collapsed container cluster. But this one was different. Not storage. Not documentation. Something else entirely. A narrow access corridor leading downward. Fresh disturbances in soil. Recent activity. Navarro stared at it for a long time before speaking. Someone's been here recently. No one answered. Because they already knew. And for the first time since the case began, Navarro understood something that made the entire investigation feel suddenly unstable. They were not just uncovering what happened in 1998. They were standing on top of something that was still in use. Somewhere beneath them, beneath the yard, beneath the network of routes and structures and silence. The system was still active. And it had just been disturbed. The moment Navarro saw the freshly disturbed soil beneath the freight yard, something inside him shifted from investigation to urgency. Not because the evidence was new, but because it was recent. The difference between a crime and an ongoing system is not scale, it is time. And time, for the first time in 17 years, was no longer on their side. The downward corridor beneath the collapsed container wasn't ancient. The edges of the excavation were too sharp, too defined. No natural collapse behaves like that. No abandoned structure preserves clean entry lines unless someone has been maintaining them. Navarro knelt at the edge, brushing his hand across the soil, feeling the texture break apart too easily. Fresh disturbance. Within days. Maybe hours. The realization hit like a delayed impact. Someone had returned here. Recently. And carefully. The excavation team fell into a controlled rhythm behind him, but Navarro could feel their uncertainty building. Every discovery so far had been historical. This was not. This was active ground. He motioned for lights to be lowered into the corridor. As the beam descended, it revealed a narrow passage reinforced with composite panels and industrial framing. Not crude. Not improvised. Structured with intent. The walls showed maintenance markings, recent ones layered over older ones, suggesting long-term use with periodic updates. Navarro exhaled slowly. This isn't abandoned, he said. No one contradicted him. Because they could see it too. The corridor extended deeper than expected, sloping slightly downward before leveling out into a reinforced junction. At the junction, 3 directional paths diverged, each marked subtly with the same symbol Navarro had seen earlier at the rest stop structure. The circle intersected by 2 parallel lines. The system again. But now it was no longer hidden in theory. It was physically mapped. They followed the central passage. The air grew colder with distance, shifting from stale earth to something artificially controlled. Ventilation. Active airflow. That detail alone changed everything. Air doesn't circulate in abandoned systems. Someone had engineered this environment to remain usable. After nearly 70 meters, the passage opened into a larger chamber. Navarro stepped in first, then stopped. The room was not empty. Not anymore. There were remnants of occupation. Folding chairs stacked along one wall. Old equipment cases. Electrical wiring routed through temporary junction boxes. And most disturbing of all, a monitoring panel mounted into the concrete, still faintly powered by a backup source. A system interface. Active indicators blinking in low light. Someone had been inside this space recently enough for power to still exist. One of the analysts whispered, "This is operational infrastructure." Navarro didn't respond. He was staring at the far wall. Because there, embedded into the concrete, was a map. Not drawn. Not printed. Etched. Lines carved into the surface connecting multiple points across Texas and Oklahoma. The rest stop node. The freight yard. The underground structure. And several additional locations Navarro had not yet physically visited, but now recognized as missing pieces in the same network. This was not evidence of crime. It was evidence of coordination. Then Navarro saw something that made his chest tighten. A section of the map had been updated. Recently. Fresh markings over older engravings. New lines extending from Blackwater outward, branching toward 2 additional rural coordinates that had never been part of the original investigation. Which meant movement was still happening. Navarro stepped closer. One of the analysts approached cautiously behind him. "These updates, they're not decades old." "I know," Navarro said quietly. That was when the radio crackled again. A field agent from the surface perimeter, voice tense, almost fragmented. "We found tire tracks leaving the yard. Fresh. Heading east. Less than an hour old." Navarro turned immediately. The system wasn't just active underground. It was moving outward again. He ordered immediate tracking of the vehicle patterns, but even as he spoke, he knew it was already too late to contain direction. Whatever had been disturbed here had already transitioned into motion. The question was no longer where the system was. It was where it was going. Navarro returned to the map chamber alone while the team coordinated surface response. Something about the engraved layout kept pulling his attention back to one specific intersection point. Not Blackwater. Not the rest stop. Not the freight yard. A rural marker north of the Texas-Oklahoma border, labeled only with a code instead of a name. BR-17. There were no civilian records for it. No public highway designation. Only legacy transport documentation buried in outdated logistics archives. Navarro pulled the records immediately through satellite uplink. BR-17 had once been a private freight corridor used exclusively by subcontractors in the late 1990s before being decommissioned after multiple regulatory violations. Officially erased from operational maps. Unofficially, it still existed in certain restricted routing systems. And more importantly, it intersected directly with Belridge Logistics transport patterns. The realization settled in slowly, but completely. BR-17 was not just another point. It was a transfer corridor. A movement channel between nodes. Which meant everything they had discovered so far, the rest stop, the underground structure, the freight yard, were not isolated sites. They were staging points along a single continuous route. And routes, Navarro knew, required direction. He left the chamber and moved back to the surface where tension had escalated. The newly discovered tire tracks had already been mapped by drone surveillance. They didn't scatter randomly. They followed a defined path leading away from the yard toward a rural highway connector that eventually fed into BR-17's corridor. Someone had just used it. Navarro looked at the data overlay on the tablet handed to him. Then paused. Because the timestamp of departure aligned with something else. A signal event. A brief cellular ping detected near the northern boundary of the yard. Origin unknown. But location triangulation showed proximity to the underground chamber entrance. Navarro felt it before the analyst said it. Someone had been inside the system while they were there. Not just recently. Simultaneously. He ordered a full perimeter sweep immediately. But even as teams moved, Navarro couldn't shake the growing certainty forming in his mind. They were not alone in this investigation. They never had been. And whoever else was operating within this system had just been alerted. That night, Navarro stayed at the yard after all official units withdrew. Only emergency lighting remained, casting long distorted shadows across broken containers and exposed earth. The wind had picked up again, carrying dust through the corridors like something searching for a way back inside. He stood near the entrance to the underground chamber, reviewing everything again. Melissa Grant, Carla Mendez, the unidentified remains, Rachel Bell, the Bell family, the freight routes, the controlled infrastructure, the repeating symbol, and now BR-17. A network didn't survive this long by accident. It survived because it adapted, because it was maintained. Navarro closed his eyes briefly, then reopened them, because something else had just occurred to him. If BR-17 was active, then movement was not just ongoing. It was scheduled, which meant the system had intent, and intent always leads somewhere. He turned toward the horizon where the eastern highway stretched into darkness. Somewhere out there, something had already left, and something else might still be waiting to arrive. The highway east of Blackwater felt different at night when Navarro followed it alone. Not quieter. Texas highways were never truly quiet, but emptier, as if traffic itself was avoiding something ahead that no one had officially acknowledged yet. The wind pressed against his vehicle in long, uneven gusts, carrying dust across the windshield like static interference over a signal that refused to stabilize. Behind him, the freight yard was already becoming a rumor again in official channels. Ahead of him, BR-17 was waiting. Navarro didn't need confirmation anymore that the system was active. The tire tracks had already proven that. What he needed now was continuity, proof of where movement ended, or more disturbing, where it paused before continuing again. The first checkpoint on the BR-17 corridor was a dead intersection marked only by a rusted highway sign half swallowed by brush. No official maintenance records existed for it after 2001. No traffic monitoring. No lighting. Just asphalt continuing into darkness like a sentence without punctuation. Navarro stopped his vehicle a few meters before the junction. Then stepped out. The air here felt older than the freight yard. Not in years, but in use. Like repeated passage had worn something into the atmosphere itself. He moved forward slowly, scanning the roadside ditch lines. That's when he noticed it. Disturbance patterns. Not recent tire marks like at the yard, but layered ones. Older tracks partially overwritten by newer ones, all following the same directional flow. Eastbound. Always eastbound. Navarro crouched, studying the overlap. The pattern wasn't chaotic. It was disciplined. Vehicles weren't just passing through BR-17. They were using it repeatedly over time like a scheduled corridor. That meant timing. And timing meant coordination. He stood again and followed the road on foot for nearly a kilometer until the asphalt shifted into a more reinforced segment, barely distinguishable from rural ground unless you knew what to look for. Embedded markers along the roadside, faded reflective studs, suggested infrastructure once maintained but officially erased. Then came the structure. At first, it looked like an abandoned utility building. Small, concrete, half-collapsed. But the positioning told a different story. It sat exactly where satellite blind spots intersected with terrain elevation shifts, creating a natural signal shadow. Someone had chosen this location deliberately. Navarro approached cautiously. The door was not locked. That alone told him more than any forensic report could. Inside, the space was cold and stripped, but not empty. There were remnants of recent use. A folding table, a radio transmitter unit, and on the wall, another version of the same symbol, circle intersected by two lines, but this time accompanied by numbers. BR-17/04/98/shift log. Navarro traced the markings with his flashlight. Shift log. Not a term used in abandoned infrastructure. A term used in operations. He turned slightly and noticed something else near the floor. Footprints. Multiple sets. Different sizes. Different tread patterns. But all aligned in a consistent directional pattern toward a rear section of the structure. Navarro moved toward it. The back wall concealed a secondary passage, barely visible unless illuminated at an angle. A sliding panel mechanism, still functional. He hesitated only briefly before activating it. The wall shifted inward with a low mechanical groan. Behind it, a corridor. Narrow. Reinforced. Active airflow. Navarro exhaled slowly. "This is not abandoned," he whispered again, but this time it sounded less like observation and more like confirmation of something he already feared. He entered. The corridor descended gently, smoother than the earlier underground structure at the freight yard. This was not improvised expansion. It was engineered continuity. The walls here were cleaner, maintained more frequently. Even the lighting system, dim emergency strips along the floor, still functioned intermittently. Someone was maintaining this. Recently, the passage opened into a second chamber. Larger than the first. Structured differently. This one was not storage. It was coordination space. A central hub. Navarro stopped at the threshold. Inside were multiple wall-mounted route boards, each displaying segments of the BR-17 corridor system. Updated annotations layered over older markings showed adjustments over time, like the system had evolved rather than decayed. But what made Navarro freeze was not the structure. It was the sound. Faint. Distant. Mechanical. A generator cycling somewhere deeper within the system. Still powered. Still active. He stepped forward slowly. At the center of the chamber stood a table with documents spread across it. Not archived. Not historical. Recent. Transport manifests. Route confirmations. Vehicle rotation schedules. And names. Some redacted. Some not. Navarro leaned in. One entry stood out immediately. R. Bell, confirmed transit, active route access. His pulse tightened. Rachel Bell wasn't just missing. She was still being referenced in active system documentation. Not as a victim. Not as historical data. As an operational entity. Navarro stepped back slightly, scanning the rest of the chamber. That's when he noticed a second exit on the far side. Unlike the others, this one was open. No panel. No concealment. And fresh footprints leading through it. He followed. The corridor beyond was shorter but colder, ending in another reinforced room with a single monitoring station still faintly active. Screens flickered intermittently, showing fragmented route data across BR-17 and adjacent corridors. One screen displayed live movement tracking. Navarro froze, because there was a signal moving along the corridor network right now. Not historical. Not archived. Live. He stepped closer. The identifier was partially masked, but the system still displayed partial metadata. Vehicle ID, B17/East Transfer/Unscheduled Variant. Below it, a second line updated in real time. Status, active. Navarro stared at it, then realized something that made the entire structure around him feel suddenly unstable. This wasn't just infrastructure. It was a tracking system. And something was currently inside it. Moving. In real time. He pulled out his radio immediately. "Command, this is Navarro. I have confirmed live movement within BR-17 corridor system. Repeat, active transit detected." Static responded. Then delay. Then a voice. Unfamiliar. Calm. Too calm. "Detective Navarro." He froze. Because the voice was not coming through official channels. It was coming from inside the system audio line. The monitoring station. He turned slowly toward the screen. The live feed flickered. Then stabilized. And for the first time since the case began, Navarro saw something that was never supposed to be visible. A passenger compartment interior. Dimly lit. Motion steady. Camera angle fixed. As if the system itself was watching. Then the image sharpened. And Navarro saw her. Rachel Bell. Sitting calmly inside the moving vehicle. Not restrained. Not panicked. Just present. Looking directly at the camera. As if she had known it would be watching. And then she spoke. Softly. Clearly. "You're finally on the right road." The feed cut instantly. Silence returned to the chamber. Navarro stood motionless, staring at the blank screen, while behind him the corridor system continued humming faintly with controlled mechanical life. Because now it was no longer theory. No longer reconstruction. The system was active. And Rachel Bell was still inside it. The moment the screen went dark, the room didn't feel empty. It felt observed. Not metaphorically, not psychologically, but structurally, as if every wall, every wire, every faint hum of the BR-17 monitoring station had shifted its attention toward Navarro in the exact instant Rachel Bell looked into that camera and spoke. "You're finally on the right road." That sentence didn't leave his mind. It lodged there, repeating with mechanical precision, like it had been designed to survive silence. Navarro didn't move for several seconds. Then he did something he almost never did in the field. He stopped trusting what he saw as isolated evidence. Because nothing about Rachel Bell's presence on a live transit feed made sense within a conventional investigative framework. Missing persons do not appear in controlled transport systems decades after disappearance unless the system itself is still actively managing their status. And that implied continuity. Not memory. Operation. He stepped away from the monitor station slowly, scanning the chamber again. The hum of the generator had changed subtly, still steady, but now accompanied by intermittent relay clicks, like distant nodes exchanging signals. The BR-17 system wasn't just active. It was communicating. Navarro accessed the terminal manually. The interface resisted at first, then responded with delayed access authorization prompts that suggested layered permissions rather than a single operator. That detail mattered more than anything else so far. Systems like this don't survive with one controlling hand. They survive with distributed access, shared control across multiple participants or nodes. He bypassed the first layer using recovered credentials from the transport manifests. The screen refreshed. New dataset loaded. And for the first time, the full scope of BR-17 operational mapping expanded across the interface. It was larger than anything Navarro had reconstructed from physical evidence. Dozens of nodes. Not just Texas, Oklahoma, New Mexico, even partial extensions into Kansas routing corridors. Each node connected through time transfer windows, not continuous travel paths. Vehicles did not move freely. They moved in windows of permission, like the system itself dictated when motion was allowed. Navarro zoomed in on the current active signal. The same identifier remained, B17/East Transfer/Unscheduled Variant. But now additional metadata had appeared beneath it. Transfer status stable. Passenger confirmed, R. Bell. Observation level, active. Intervention flag, pending. Navarro read the last line twice. Intervention flag. Someone somewhere had authority to intervene. Or prevent intervention. That meant oversight. Or governance. And governance meant hierarchy. He backed away from the terminal slightly, his attention shifting again to the corridor behind him. The realization was forming too quickly now, stacking in layers that no single explanation could contain. Rachel Bell wasn't simply traveling through the system. She was being tracked within it, monitored, maintained, and possibly used as a live reference point for operational flow. That meant she had a function inside the system that extended beyond disappearance. Navarro felt the case invert in his mind. For 17 years, they had assumed Rachel Bell was a missing person connected to a series of murders. But inside BR-17's structure, she was not marked as missing. She was marked as active, which meant, in the system's logic, she was not lost. She was in transit status, a designation that only exists when movement is intentional. The radio on Navarro's belt crackled again, this time through a different channel frequency, one not assigned by his team. He froze immediately. A voice came through. Not static this time. Clear. Controlled. You shouldn't be inside that node. Navarro didn't respond immediately. His hand moved slowly toward the radio, but he didn't press transmit. Identify yourself, he said finally. A pause. Then, you already know the system recognizes you now. That was the wrong answer, because it implied awareness from the other side of infrastructure. Navarro turned slowly toward the monitoring station again. The screen had reactivated without input. The live feed was back. But this time, it wasn't just the vehicle interior. It was wider. Multiple feeds. Different angles. Different vehicles. Different nodes. All active. All moving. And in each one, subtle presence indicators marked passengers. Some visible. Some not. Then Navarro noticed something that made his stomach tighten. One of the feeds showed an interior space that looked familiar. Not identical, but structurally similar to the underground chamber at the freight yard. Same reinforced walls. Same restraint anchors. Same layout. But occupied. And on the far end of the frame, partially visible in motion blur, a figure sitting still. Female. Blonde hair. Calm posture. Rachel Bell again. But this time she was not alone. A second figure stood near the edge of the frame, partially obscured, moving with controlled precision. Navarro leaned forward instinctively, trying to adjust the feed angle through system controls. but access locked immediately. Then a new message appeared on screen. Access level modified. Observation only. No intervention permitted. Navarro stepped back slowly. This is not a surveillance system, he said quietly. It was an operational restriction system, designed not to observe crime, but to regulate movement. The implication was staggering. BR-17 wasn't just a transport corridor. It was a controlled environment where human movement was categorized, scheduled, and adjusted in real time. And Rachel Bell was not an anomaly inside it. She was a monitored variable. Navarro exited the chamber quickly, moving back through the corridor toward the surface. The air felt colder now, not physically, but perceptually, as if the deeper he went into the system's logic, the more it detached from anything resembling normal investigative reality. When he reached the surface, dawn was breaking over the BR-17 junction, casting long fractured shadows across the abandoned roadside structure. But something had changed outside. Vehicles. Multiple. Parked at distances that suggested surveillance positioning rather than random arrival. Navarro didn't reach for his weapon immediately. He simply observed. Because this wasn't a confrontation yet. It was positioning. Then his radio crackled again. This time his official channel. Navarro, report status. He responded. I've confirmed live system operation. BR-17 is active. Multiple nodes engaged. Passenger entity identified as Rachel Bell is currently in transit status across system network. Silence followed. Longer than normal. Then, repeat confirmation. Navarro looked back toward the hidden entrance. Then answered. Rachel Bell is not missing. A pause. Then the response. Understood. That was all. No questions. No escalation. Just acknowledgement. Which was worse than disbelief. Because acknowledgement meant acceptance of a reality that should not exist within official frameworks. Navarro lowered the radio slowly. Behind him, the system beneath BR-17 continued operating unseen, feeding data through routes that had existed longer than the investigation itself. And somewhere inside that structure, Rachel Bell continued moving. Not away from Blackwater, but through it, as if the entire network was still waiting for her to reach a destination that had never been officially recorded. Navarro stood at the edge of the corridor entrance for a long moment, watching the road stretch eastward into empty distance. Then he made a decision that would shift the investigation again. He wasn't going back to report. Not yet. Because now the only way forward was inside the system itself. Navarro didn't return to Blackwater. That decision alone changed the geometry of the investigation. Because once you stop reporting what you find and start following where it leads, you are no longer solving a case. You are entering its structure. And BR-17, as Navarro now understood, was not built to be observed from the outside. It was designed to be entered. The eastern corridor stretched ahead of him like a wound in the landscape that never fully healed. Dawn had broken, but light here felt delayed, as if the road was processing it before allowing it through. Navarro drove without radio contact now, the silence inside the vehicle heavy enough to feel engineered. Every few kilometers, he passed markers that weren't on any public map. Subtle infrastructure remnants. Reflective posts half buried in soil. Old service signage faded beyond recognition. Each one confirmed the same truth. This corridor had once been active at a scale never publicly acknowledged. And it still functioned in fragments. That was the most dangerous part. Systems don't die cleanly when they are only partially dismantled. They decay into unpredictable survivals. By mid-morning, Navarro reached the first transition zone. A wide stretch of road that split into two directions without signage. One path appeared newly paved. The other looked older, worn down, but still maintained in subtle ways. Edges cleared, gravel compressed, vegetation controlled. Navarro chose the older route. Within minutes, his radio picked up faint interference again. Not a broadcast. Not a signal. More like fragments of structured communication bleeding through environmental noise. Then a voice. Not his team. Not official channels. You're deviating from the mapped flow. Navarro didn't respond immediately. He kept driving, eyes fixed on the road. Then he said, "Who is this?" A pause. Then the same calm tone from before. "You already know what this is." The connection cut. Navarro tightened his grip on the wheel. He had crossed into something that responded in real time to deviation. That alone confirmed the system wasn't just infrastructure. It was adaptive. By early afternoon, the landscape shifted. Sparse industrial remnants gave way to isolated agricultural zones, then to open fields broken by abandoned utility structures. And at the center of one of these fields stood something that should not have been there. A monitoring station. Smaller than the BR-17 hub facility, but structurally identical in design philosophy. Concealment over visibility. Function over explanation. Navarro stopped at a distance and approached on foot. The door was unlocked. Again. Inside, the air smelled faintly of oil and stale electricity. The station was active in a minimal capacity. Dim panels flickered with routing data. But this one was different. It wasn't just tracking movement. It was predicting it. Navarro studied the interface. Projected routes branched ahead of current known positions. Multiple potential paths highlighted in real time, adjusting dynamically as if responding to unseen inputs. He realized what he was looking at. This was not a surveillance node. It was a forecasting node. The system wasn't just recording movement. It was anticipating it, and then adjusting accordingly. Navarro leaned closer. One route was highlighted in red. Active prediction path. Unit RB/final transfer vector. He froze. Final transfer vector. That language was not casual. It implied endpoint logic. Completion. Rachel Bell wasn't just moving through the system. She was approaching a defined destination. Navarro accessed deeper layers. The system resisted at first, then yielded partially. More data opened in fragments, restricted logs, incomplete archives, segmented histories. And then something unexpected appeared. A personnel classification file. Not police. Not criminal. Operational designation. Under it, one name appeared repeatedly across historical entries tied to BR-17 and its associated nodes. Rachel Bell. Status, interface subject. Role, transfer anchor unverified. Functionality, route stabilization variable. Navarro stared at the screen. The words didn't align with anything in criminal investigation frameworks. They belonged to something else entirely. Something procedural. Systemic. Structured. He stepped back slowly. Interface subject, he repeated quietly. That meant she wasn't just being moved through the system. She was interacting with it in a way that affected its function. And that meant she was not passive within it. She was integral. The radio in the station suddenly activated without input. Same voice again. Come. Closer now. You're inside the observation layer now. Navarro turned toward the source. No visible speaker. No operator. Just system output. He responded, "Where is Rachel Bell?" A pause. Then, "She is where the system stabilizes." That answer meant nothing and everything at the same time. Navarro moved quickly to the exit, stepping back into the sunlight. But now the environment felt different. Not physically altered, but contextually redefined. Every structure he saw now carried potential system relevance. Every road a possible vector. Every abandoned building a potential node. Because once you recognize a system, you cannot unsee it. And that is when Navarro saw the vehicle. Parked half a kilometer down the road. Dark pickup. Cracked left headlight. The same detail that had followed the entire case from the beginning. But this time it wasn't abandoned. The engine was off, but recent dust displacement suggested arrival within the hour. Navarro approached slowly. Each step deliberate. The door opened before he reached it. Not forcefully. Not abruptly. Just enough to indicate awareness. Inside, no driver. Only a radio unit sitting on the passenger seat. Active. Navarro leaned in. The speaker crackled. Then Rachel Bell's voice. Not recorded. Live. You're close now. He stepped back immediately, scanning the surrounding field. No visible movement. No secondary presence. Just the truck. And the voice continuing through the radio. You've been following movement. But movement isn't the point. Navarro tightened his jaw. What is the point? A pause. Then, stability. The word landed differently. Not as explanation. As function. Navarro looked back at BR-17 maps in his mind, at the nodes, the transfers, the prediction systems. Stability wasn't about geography. It was about flow. And flow required balance. The implication formed slowly, dangerously. Rachel Bell was not a missing person within this system. She was part of its balancing mechanism. Navarro stepped away from the truck. And that's when the radio inside it changed frequency. The voice shifted. No longer Rachel. Now something else. Deeper. More structured. Detective Navarro. He froze. Because the system had just acknowledged him directly. Not as an observer. Not as an intruder. But as a variable. You are now inside an active stabilization cycle. Navarro didn't answer, because he finally understood what BR-17 actually was. It wasn't a route. It wasn't a transport network. It was a controlled continuity system designed to regulate movement across unmonitored geography. And Rachel Bell was part of its operational balance. The radio continued. Intervention is no longer external. Navarro slowly looked down the road. East still stretched ahead. Unmarked. Unending. And somewhere beyond it, the system was still moving. Still adjusting. Still waiting. And now it had begun including him in its structure.